Greetings, conservatives. This is your humble host, John Moraga, and we are back with more ConservaCast. We look forward to keeping you informed with the latest and most relevant commentary of conservative issues. So without further ado, here are a few topics I'd like to discuss. California Assembly Bill 2943 is a piece of legislation out of California that will effectively ban the sale of Bibles in the state. That may sound paranoid or hyperbolic, but a critical analysis of the bill reveals its real agenda. Supposed fact-checking sites have tried to dismiss the claims that this bill will in effect ban Bibles, but that is actually part of the coordinated efforts by the media to play defense for the liberal agenda. The bill will make it illegal to offer commercial therapy for individuals struggling with same-sex attraction, under the guise of fraudulent commercial sale of literature or therapy that provides any sort of help for those struggling with same-sex attraction will be considered illegal. Yesterday, the California Assembly Committee convened to continue the process of getting this legislation through. Although dozens organized outside the state capitol to protest these efforts, it may not be enough to stop the passing of this legislation. I listened to some of the discussion that went on among the Assembly, and it was difficult to sit through. The chairman was essentially shutting down the questioning of how this legislation would infringe on freedom of choice of commerce, that is. It was repeated over and over again that, quote, there is no medical evidence that conversion therapy works, end quote, and that it is actually harmful to those who engage in it. It was as though I was watching a scene out of George Orwell's novel 1984. Dissent was shouted down, and the liberal agenda was championed as truth. I have to move on, or my blood pressure will skyrocket. Next, President Trump has just signed a historic agreement with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to denuclearize North Korea. However, I'd like to address an issue that seems to be getting less and less attention by the mainstream media. That is, China's seizing of the South China Sea. This issue may not affect the daily lives of the average American, but it could very easily become the leading story in the news within a few years. A recent article in the Asia Times states, quote, gas exploration efforts by Vietnam and the Philippines have either been stopped outright or discouraged unless they partner with China, thus giving Beijing access to resources to which it has no valid claim under international law, end quote. These are developing stories which may have major consequences in the near future. Finally, I'd like to pick up on a topic I began to address in the previous episode of ConservaCast. That is self-accountability. It is very easy to be critical and look at the outside. It's easy to be an observer of the downfall of our society and the world, but I believe it is imperative that conservatives evaluate our own actions. Conservatives philosophically embrace self-accountability. This defining tenet of conservatism is too rarely taught, much less emphasized, because it can be offensive to some. Unfortunately, even I cannot spend as much time on this topic as I'd like to spend either, but I would like to mention just a few aspects of self-accountability. They are self-conduct, entrepreneurship, and charity, not socialism. But more on this in another episode. Now, my purpose is not to cast judgment, or to try to come across as holier than thou. In fact, I was quite guilty of a lack of self-accountability myself before I really appreciated the ideals of conservatism. That stipulated, I'd like to offer some food for thought. Self-conduct. No doubt this is a touchy subject, as many of us have made several regrettable choices in our lives, and sadly, the more I am involved with public interactions, the more I witness the plaguing results of a lack of self-conduct in our society. For example, on sexual choices, premarital relationships. In addition to broken hearts, the stats on STDs are depressing. The sexual revolution of the 60s so normalized promiscuity that subsequent generations normalized premarital sex. Further, adultery is so prevalent in our society because spouses rationalize this transgression too often. The institution of marriage has deteriorated so much that divorce has increased exponentially in the past few decades. As a result, The past few generations of children have been drastically affected by broken homes. This, in part, explains why so many young people are lost and confused in our society. College students are more easily indoctrinated than properly educated. Hollywood entertainers are more influential than hypocritical parents. This leads into the next area of poor choices: entertainment choices. This may sound like a silly thing to harp on, but a serious consideration of it reveals a very strong influence on our personal choices. Billions, literally billions of dollars are invested to influence our opinions and purchasing choices through various forms of multimedia. Unfortunately, these efforts are very effective, as too many of us suspend our self-accountability and fall susceptible to the persuasion of hedonistic suggestions. Now, I speak from a direct personal involvement in the entertainment industry. In my youth, I was a background actor in several movies, TV shows, and commercials. Fortunately, I didn't get so far into the trenches of Hollywood that I became a well-known celebrity, as I decided to enlist into the Air Force at the age of 17. However, I was far more exposed to the inner workings of the industry than the average citizen. So, I can personally verify the organized efforts that the entertainment industry takes to influence and control our thoughts and decisions. Often they are subtle, but I've noticed in recent years they have become more unabashed and blatant. They encourage sexual immorality, political liberalism, materialism, and so many other promotions of lack of self-accountability. Regarding entrepreneurship, conservatives are more likely to be entrepreneurs as a result of self-accountability. Obviously, conservatives don't have a monopoly on entrepreneurship, but they do have a great affinity for it. Conservatives have an appreciation for generating their own revenue and being self-motivated. Don't get me wrong, there is absolutely nothing wrong with being employed by an employer. In fact, it is one of the most honorable virtues. My only point is that being an entrepreneur and being self-sustaining is very consistent with conservatism. In addition to being fiscally responsible, many conservatives have started businesses and invested in entrepreneurial endeavors. This leads to the last aspect of self-accountability I will briefly address. Charity versus socialism. Conservatives believe in charity. Liberals believe in redistribution of wealth. Conservatives are some of the most charitable people in the world, primarily out of a religious conviction, but also to counter the liberal agenda of socialism. Charity is given freely out of one's own conviction. Redistribution of wealth, or socialism, is a form of theft via taxation. In fact, the American Revolution was in part based on overtaxation by the British. I will elaborate more on this in a later episode, but I just wanted to briefly touch on this aspect of self-accountability. Thanks for joining us once again, and we hope you will invite your friends and family to join us in our efforts to champion conservatism for generations to come.
But it wouldn't be nothing. Not a woman or